One of the legal standards that police departments and sheriff's offices all over the country desperately want to keep in place is conditional or qualified immunity. The Police Tribune on their Facebook page posted a piece by law enforcement today on November 14th, 2025, entitled "Why Stripping Qualified Immunity Could Handcuff Law Enforcement." We don't want law enforcement handcuffed while they're busy handcuffing innocent people, right? I mean, with handcuffs on, how are they going to shoot your dog, tase your kid, throw your grandmother to the ground or against a pole in a Walmart parking lot? With handcuffs on, how are they going to chase you down the street at 120 miles per hour for a broken tail light? So what we're going to do is go over this article because it's filled with damn lies in an attempt to protect the worst gang on planet Earth, law enforcement. Dylan Burrows, writing for Law Enforcement Today, says, in the national debate over policing, one legal doctrine remains consistently misunderstood, yet critically important to law enforcement: qualified immunity. Critics portray it as a blanket shield for bad behavior, but qualified immunity is a necessary legal protection that allows officers to do their job without the constant fear of being personally sued for making split-second decisions. And then he says, qualified immunity is not a free pass. Really? Stay tuned. We're going to address that specifically. It does not protect officers who knowingly violate the law or act outside the scope of their duties. Instead, it shields government officials, including police officers, from civil lawsuits unless they violate clearly established constitutional rights, a standard set by the U.S. Supreme Court to balance accountability with the practical needs of public service. Imagine responding to a volatile domestic disturbance call. You arrive in seconds. What? Arrive in seconds? Assess the danger and act to prevent harm. In hindsight, someone may claim your actions weren't perfect. You kind of see where Dylan's going with this? Should you be dragged into a personal lawsuit for doing what you believed was right under pressure? Qualified immunity ensures that if your actions were reasonable and followed established precedent, you can continue serving without the crushing weight of legal retaliation. Cops don't know anything about retaliation, do they? This matters now more than ever. Law enforcement agencies across the U.S. are short on officers. Recruitment is down, resignations are up, and officers are increasingly leaving the job. One reason is the fear that their split-second decisions will not only lead to job discipline, but also to personal financial ruin. Without qualified immunity, every mistake or perceived mistake could trigger a lawsuit. That risk would paralyze officers and discourage proactive policing. Would you chase a suspect into a backyard if the wrong fence jump might lead to years in court? Would you intervene to stop a fight if you feared being sued for using force? Stripping away this protection would handcuff officers far more than any piece of legislation ever could. Critics argue that accountability demands more lawsuits, but accountability already exists through criminal charges, internal affairs, and other means. Qualified immunity only applies in civil court, and even then, only when there is no clear legal precedent to warn an officer that their actions were unlawful. Opponents often cite rare, extreme cases and claim that the doctrine protects bad cops. However, the overwhelming majority of officers are honorable men and women who serve to protect the public under dangerous and unpredictable circumstances. Dylan must be a cop, because the law enforcement BS is getting deep in this article. Qualified immunity is not about excusing misconduct. It's about recognizing reality. Law enforcement is not a theoretical profession. Officers must make decisions in real time with real consequences. Qualified immunity provides them with the flexibility to act decisively in the service of public safety, while still allowing truly unlawful actions to be challenged when a precedent exists. Keep that in mind because we're going to go over that in a second too. The bottom line is that qualified immunity is not about protecting the badge. It's about protecting the person wearing it from being unfairly punished for doing their job. We're just doing our job, ma'am. Just doing our job. If we want to retain good officers and keep our community safe, we must defend this essential legal doctrine. Lies, lies, destructive law enforcement lies. First of all, you got to understand that this doctrine comes from the U.S. Supreme Court cases interpreting 42 U.S.C. 1983, the main federal statute that allows people to sue state and local officials for violating their constitutional rights. The court created this defense supposedly to balance two competing interests. Number one, holding officials accountable when they violate clearly established rights, and number two, protecting officials from being sued and thus paralyzed by fear of lawsuits when they act in good faith in uncertain legal situations. And they say because the immunity is not blanket or absolute, even though it seems like it, like the absolute immunity given to judges, prosecutors, or legislators, the court called it qualified immunity, also known as conditional immunity. So what's wrong with this article? I want to give you a point-by-point rebuttal to Law Enforcement Today's article from the perspective of critics who've studied the real-world application and frequent abuse of qualified immunity. And we're going to draw from Supreme Court cases, lower court data, and widely documented patterns. Number one, this article claims, quote, qualified immunity is not a blanket shield for bad behavior. But the reality is, it is a blanket shield for bad behavior. Often, the clearly established prong has been interpreted so narrowly that officers routinely escape liability even for egregious misconduct unless a prior court decision involves nearly identical facts. You want an example? Corbett versus Vickers in 2019. A deputy fired into a motionless family dog and accidentally shot a 10-year-old child lying on the ground. The 11th Circuit granted immunity because no prior case involved shooting a child while aiming at a dog. Here's another example. Kelsey versus Ernst from the 8th Circuit in 2019. An officer slammed a 5-foot-tall, 120-pound woman to the ground, breaking her collarbone for walking away while arguing about her daughter's behavior. Get this, immunity was granted because no prior case involved slamming a small woman rather than a large suspect. The doctrine has basically become identical twin precedent. If the facts aren't almost exactly the same as a previous, well, immunity applies, even when everyone agrees that the conduct was unconstitutional. The second claim in the article is it only protects officers who act reasonably. In reality, the Supreme Court in Pearson versus Callahan in 2009 made the clearly established prong the first question courts can ask, which means judges often never decide whether the underlying conduct was constitutional at all. And this creates constitutional stagnation. In other words, rights can be violated repeatedly without ever becoming clearly established. An example of that is Jessup versus City of Fresno from the 9th Circuit in 2019. Officers allegedly stole $225,000 in cash and coins during a search warrant execution. And get this, immunity was granted to the officers because no prior case held that stealing money during a search violates the Fourth Amendment. The court called it morally reprehensible, but not clearly unconstitutional. The third claim in the article is that officers make split decisions. In reality, many cases that receive qualified immunity involve no split decision at all. It usually involves things like lying on warrant affidavits, falsifying police reports, excessive force against compliant or restrained suspects, like shooting a man holding a garden hose, tasing a seated, non-resisting suspect multiple times, dragging people out of cars because feelings got hurt. This split-second framing is selectively applied because everybody knows this doctrine protects deliberate misconduct as well. The fourth claim that this article makes is, without qualified immunity, every mistake could trigger a lawsuit. The reality is, prior to 1982 in Harlow versus Fitzgerald, the pre-modern test still required good faith, and courts somehow managed to function. More importantly, municipalities, not officers, pay almost all of the dollars that plaintiffs recover in police misconduct cases. And number two, officers almost never pay out of pocket, even when they lose qualified immunity. And this article's personal financial ruin argument is largely a myth. The settlement money is usually coughed up by municipal insurers and the city's risk pool, which means taxes typically rise. It doesn't bother the individual officer. It doesn't ruin his life in any way. The fifth claim by this article is accountability already exists through criminal charges and internal affairs. But when the rubber meets the road, criminal prosecution of police is extraordinarily rare. Less than 1% of killings by police lead to charges, and even fewer convictions. Internal affairs investigations almost never results in termination for excessive force or dishonesty in high-profile cases. Civil rights lawsuits under 1983 are often the only realistic path to any form of accountability or compensation for victims. The sixth claim in this article is stripping away this protection would handcuff officers. The truth is, several jurisdictions have limited or eliminated qualified immunity altogether at the state level with no collapse in policing. Colorado in 2020, New Mexico in 2021, New York City in 2021, and Massachusetts in 2023 all passed laws removing or limiting the defense for state law claims. And there's no evidence of mass resignations or the inability to recruit in those places beyond the national trends that already exist. And the last claim this article makes is critics cite rare, extreme cases. But in reality, these cases aren't rare at all. You know this. I know this. Everybody knows this. Reuters in 2022 identified more than 30 appellate decisions since 2017 in which officers received immunity for conduct that included planting evidence, brutal beatings, and fatal shootings of non-threatening individuals. Precisely because no prior case was close enough on the facts. So the bottom line from a critical and historical perspective is that qualified immunity as currently applied doesn't merely protect reasonable mistakes made in the heat of the moment. It routinely shields lying, brutality, theft, and even intentional constitutional violations because of an artificially high, clearly established bar that the Supreme Court itself keeps raising. In Tyler versus Riojas in 2020, the Supreme Court scolded lower courts for requiring near identical precedent, and yet the practice continues unabated. So the doctrine of qualified immunity has drifted far from its original 1967 to 1982 justification in good faith defenses. Qualified immunity as it stands is actually near absolute immunity in all but the most factually duplicated circumstances. That's why a lot of legal scholars, civil rights organizations, and even some conservative libertarian voices like the Cato Institute and Institute for Justice now call for the reform of qualified immunity or its outright abolition. In my personal opinion, the Law Enforcement Today piece presents a 1980s era idealized version of the doctrine that no longer matches how federal courts actually apply it in 2025. So what do you think? Do you think stripping qualified immunity could handcuff law enforcement? And do you think maybe law enforcement needs to be handcuffed? Leave your thoughts about this for the world and the global thought, please, in the comments section below. If you want to support this channel, you can do it for free. Just like this video, share this video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell notification icon. If you want, grab a shirt. It really helps out. Become a channel member. But more importantly, understand that the government is that psychopathic, parasitic, violent, thieving, criminal gang you were afraid would take over in the absence of government. I'll see you in the next video.